Hello, CSL fans. My name is Marionett, and I am here for Week 6 weekly recap of the CSL. Sorry if I sound a little under the weather. I am, so naturally I will sound that way. Today's guest is nobody. I'm sorry about that. But I just really want to quickly move through all these matches that we had in Week 6. And then after that, we can go through a couple things that have not been in some of these videos. Sorry for the voice crack. Once again, very under the weather here, but I'm going to be going over things like current stats, as well as power rankings, as well as predictions for the Week 7 outer conference matches, which are going to certainly be interesting in terms of standings, which I'll get to later. But just to get these week six matches over with, we are going to start out with the Syracuse Sylveons, who took a 2-0 victory over the undefeated San Diego Wild Chargers. Since we didn't have recaps last time, I guess I'll just say who I predicted to win before the match. And honestly, I predicted Weaviles to win. I didn't see too much on the Sylveons team except for Greninja that really put a hole in the Wild Chargers team, specifically Mega Sableye. But as it turns out, Dan, with his creative sets, was able to bring in a Swords Dance Infernape to cripple the Sableye down, and a Grass Knot Greninja, also a dual stab to really just punch holes in the Wild Chargers teams. And it was just a good team building by Dan to recognize that Greninja just worked so well against Weaviles' team. I will point out that the deciding factor of the match was a Stone Edge miss from Weaviles that would have killed Greninja, but didn't in the long run, so that's unfortunate for Weaviles, but it's part of the game. He had a 20% chance to lose while using that move, so sometimes things happen. Weaviles is still at the very top of his division, so this hasn't impacted him too greatly yet. Maybe it will in the future, but it definitely moves Dan up much to a stronger playoff spot, and also a 4-game win streak coming back from a 0-2. A couple other things to notice were some mistakes from both sides in the beginning of the match. There were some predictions from Weaviles predicting Dan to switch out and going for Volt switches on a Volt Absorb Lantern, which just was able to cripple the Electros as a whole, when in reality he could have brought in Gastrodon the whole time, or even Mega Sableye if he chose to. He just kept keeping Electros in and healing the Lantern and making these over predictions, which definitely lost him momentum early game. But there was also some bad calcs from Dan earlier, or a bit later in the match, where he predicted a Fire Punch from a +2 Infernape to take out a max defense, max HP Sableye, and it didn't even though the Sableye wasn't even max defense anyway, but it was just some bad calcs. He calced regular Sableye, but that's classic Dan anyway, so that was pretty much just that match. It was a very quick, I think it was like 20-something turn match, well played by both sides, but Dan was able to take out the one of the 2 undefeated teams left standing, so good on Dan. The next match we have is the Detroit Pyroar taking on the BC Bastiodons, a 3-2 versus 3-2 match. Before the match, I predicted Swoops and the Detroit Pyro to win, who have just had a stronger presence in the CSL, obviously, being the founder and such, but also just this season as a player. Despite what the record says, the 2 losses were against statistic-wise, are the 2 best teams in the league. So definitely that's just a lesson of you not taking someone's skill in perspective, just a number. But we did see in the match, the BC Bastiodons were off to a great lead. The Detroit Pyro forgot about Mold Breaker on the Mega Gyarados, so an Earthquake was able to obliterate the Rotom Heat and also a Sacred Fire from an Entei on a crit was able to take out Mega Venusaur, so things were looking really, really grim for Zwoops, but a Starmie with the perfect coverage against this team, which had Thunderbolt, Scald, Psyshock, and Ice Beam, was a really, really good set, and was able to basically one-hit KO the entire team. It died at the very, very end from Life Orb, hence the 6-1, but it was essentially a Starmie sweep. The Bastiodons just didn't have enough to prep for that set. Unfortunately, there was a 50-50 midway through the match when Starmie was starting its sweep, where the BC Bastiodon sent an Entei, and it could either Sacred Fire and have the Starmie outspeed it and kill it, predicting the Doublade to come in, or it can Extreme Speed and nearly take out the Starmie, and then the Starmie would die from Life Orb, killing the Entei, and he ended up losing the 50-50, going for Sacred Fire, which just meant that the Starmie was able to continue a sweep, and it was pretty much unharmed in the long run. And that was just a really quick match, not much else to say. The next match was the Boston Bisharps taking on the Magcargo Tel Aviv, which were the which are the two division leaders in the upper conference, being the Yellow and the Crystal Conference. This was just a great match all around. There was great plays and great prep on both sides. This is definitely one of the top matches of the season so far, and just shows what a playoff game is really going to look like in the end. Both teams coming off of, the Bisharps coming off of a huge loss, ending their undefeated streak. The Magcargo Tel Aviv rising back from a devastating loss a few weeks ago, but it was a great match. Both teams prepped well, but the thing that hindered Alpha Horas immediately was the trick choice scarfed Uxie, I believe it was. It was either choice scarfed or choice banded. Pardon me for not remembering, but the Uxie had Fire Punch for the Abomasnow. In the end, though, it was able to trick the Musharna, which was the really only good Medicham answer for the Magcargo Tel Aviv, but in the end it was actually Garchomp and Quagsire that were able to offensively and defensively slowly whittle the Magcargo Tel Aviv. There was a choice scarfed Tyrantrum, which was able to stop the Medicham from putting in so much work, but it ultimately came down to a roll against the Quagsire. Alpha barely missed that roll. The Quagsire lived on 1%, and Tyrantrum went down, essentially losing the Magcargo the game. But I definitely would not say that, like, if the Magcargo Tel Aviv had taken out Tyrantrum, that I would definitely not say that if Alpha Horas had taken out the Quagsire, the match would have been over, because there was definitely still a lot of things Akeem could have done in that situation, but luckily it didn't end up happening, and it was a 3-0 victory for the Boston Bisharps. A lot closer than the score indicates, in my opinion, but it was a great match nonetheless, and that puts the Bisharps at the top of the conference thus far in the season. Next up, and I should mention that I predicted the Bisharps to win this one, because I knew Akeem just had a lot of great prep up his sleeve, and I did actually see that in the match. Sorry, I'm going to start remembering to name my predictions at the beginning of each. Sorry, Dan. Dan's editing. Shout out to Dan. So the next match we have is the Texas Tauros taking on the Memphis Mamoswines, which was a frustrating match, man. This was a hard match to watch, because if Anthony could have picked up this victory, that would have meant so much for him and his overall record. Because going to 3-3 in such a tight division, as you'll see later when I show off the standings, going 3-3 in such a tight division would have put him in such a nice spot. And I definitely think there were ways Anthony could have won, even if they would rely on 50% from like Diamond Storm hacks, which I'll get to later. I definitely think he still should have gone for it. Something I noticed from both of these players, just it was a punch for punch match, but a lot of both these players just would unnecessarily sack Pokemon, and like you'd switch something in and then realize it's the wrong switch and then switch back out. Both these teams were just taking unnecessary damage from both sides, from each other. They were just taking unnecessary damage from each other, and it balanced out in the end. But if both of these players end up facing a lot higher ranked players, then you'll start to see them struggling more, losing momentum right off the bat, and kind of putting themselves in that situation versus the other player, letting the other player just be able to grab the momentum and take advantage of it, which I definitely think that they need to improve on further on into the season. Just like don't rush it. Like don't rush the plays. Think about them, because once you do it, you can't take it back. And that's what happened to both teams that's what's been happening to both teams throughout this season. So I really want to see both of them improve on that. The next match we have is the Houston Haunters taking on the Southeast Swablu. This was a very good match to watch. It was a fun match to watch, but it didn't have as much of a wow factor than a lot of other matches. Sorry, I'm gonna start remembering to name my predictions at the beginning of each. Sorry, Dan. Specifically, it was just the Haunters able to just sweep up with a Raikou against Swablu's team when Swablu really just didn't have an answer for it once Diggersby was gone. Unfortunately, the way I see it, this wasn't like the Haunters actually showing off skill and winning. It was the Swablu trying to fight back, but just not having the right prep. I think if Swablu had the right prep, this was the match for Swablu to finally get her first win, and put her back in some sort of position to get her out of CSLL range, or even, as crazy as it sounds, playoff spots are not a sealed deal. So, I think that it came down to prep versus prep, and Damon just naturally out-prepped because of having one Pokemon that Swablu just didn't have the right answers to, which I think she'll have to take into account for future matches. Next match we have is the Saugatuck Sandslahes versus the Zion Zards. Classy Stain, undefeated once again, taking a narrow 1-0 victory versus the Zion Zards. As you can tell by the scores of Victini and Manectric, that if you can tell by the scores of Victini and Manectric, you can see that that Victini was just able to put so much pressure onto the Sandslahes team, and Manectric really couldn't pull off its Volt Switch shenanigans it really wanted to do. Also, you can see Gliscor's score, where also once certain threats were down, a lot of things didn't have the potential of Wallet. We saw a lot of cool things from Classy's side, such as a Icy Wind Tornadus, which was able to put a lot of holes in the Zion Zards team in terms of speed control, and also just doing massive damage onto the Gliscor. We saw some strange over predictions from Classy, but we also saw them from Cherrymander, so it was there was a balance of over predictions, I feel. We also saw a cool Sap Sipper Pursuit Bouffalant, which with also Facade, so it was able to put a lot of early game holes in Cherry's team, even though Cherry kind of held the momentum throughout the entirety of the match until the very end, when Classy was able to reveal his win con of a defensive Crobat to take out both the Victini and the Slurpuff, which ultimately led to the Sandslahes' victory, keeping them the only undefeated team in the league thus far. finally, or not finally, second to finally, we have the Calgary Hydro Cannons taking a 5-0 victory versus the Washington Weaviles. This match was so important for both teams being both fighting for that wild card spot, as you'll see later in the conference, that the upper division was just so tight for wild card spots, especially since the two top players in each division were actually facing each other. It just made things so much more tense. This match mattered a lot, and for Obda to get a 5-0 victory, it really puts him far in the lead above the rest. This match really just came down to the Weaviles not switching incorrectly to the Nidoking. I wouldn't say that's 100% necessarily Dub's fault. I mean, technically it is, but it was smart from Obda to trick trick Dubstep into believing he was not a Scarf set, revealing these Stealth Rocks, and then later revealing it was Scarf Rocks, but that was only revealed by the time half the Weaviles team was gone. We also saw some really cool predictions from Obda that were kind of flashbacks from Obda's match against Alpha, where he was making these crazy over predictions, like switching in Embor on the predicted Beedrill switch in, which ultimately led to the Hydro Cannons keeping the momentum and not letting any switch in, not letting any prediction from Dub actually go through in the match, hence the 5-0 from the Calgary Hydro Cannons. Next up is the final match. We have the Florida Feraligatrs, who were being coached by Cries this week, and the NJ Flabebe, who are, as always, coached by Nefertum. Really good prep on both sides. Scarf Latias was able to just really put in a lot of work versus the Flabebe. Being a defensive Vaporeon and letting the Bronzong go down so early really put holes in the Flabebe's team, and really just not giving it a switch into a Scarf Latias with Psyshock or Draco. And also Gardevoir was kind of a defensive set. As you'll notice, Nefertum didn't actually bring the Mega Gardevoir this week and instead brought a Trick Scarf Gardevoir that didn't actually matter in the long run. It was never actually used, but it was clear that something wasn't right because it wasn't Megaing. But unfortunately, Nef just didn't have a good switch in for the Latias and just had to let things go down consistently, especially once Bronzong and Gardevoir were down. Latias was just able to put in so much work versus the team. We also saw the Power Meloetta put in work versus a specially defensive Gardevoir, and I think that Meloetta was proven in this match to be a Pokemon that should not be messed with, despite it being an RU Pokemon. Unfortunately for Nef, he's on a 4-game loss streak, but I think that he hasn't been, going down in terms of skill. I just think that he's been playing a lot harder and more difficult opponents as time goes on, but it's definitely not to say that the Flabebe's playoff spot is ruined, because it's definitely not, as you'll see in the rankings coming up soon. But before that, we have a couple more things to go through. We have the Pokemon of the Week, which is Starmie, coached by the Detroit Pyroar, who, as I said before, was able to get a 6-1 sweep due to a Life Orb damage at the end of the battle against the BC Bastiodons, carrying Bolt Beam as well as Dual Stab, was able to just have super effective damage on everything on the team that BC brought. And the way I see it, even if the Pyroar had so many more Pokemon down and it was 6-2 or 6-3 or something, I could definitely just by a team prep see Starmie just bringing the game back. Even though it was 6-4 at the time, I definitely see the potential for Starmie to have done it later on in the game if need be, but the Pyro knew the perfect moment to bring Starmie in, and even if it didn't end up getting the 6-0 sweep, which it did, it would still punch massive holes in the BC Bastiodons team, which was very good for them. Next up, we have the top killers. A bit of a change since last week. We see that in terms of kills, both Staraptor and Tornadus Therian from the Sandslahes and the Wild Chargers are tied. Neither performed stunningly this week, but they were able to get enough kills to maintain their top position. But Tornadus Therian is definitely catching up on the Staraptor. But the real Pokemon that stepped up for this week was Nidoking at the Calgary Hydro Cannons, who was able to get a 4-1 sweep on top of their consistent other times. Nidoking's just been able to punch holes with that sheer force power. In other opponents' teams, I just think that the threat of Nidoking being able to be run special, physical, which Obda's done both, being able to be Stealth Rocks or Toxic Spikes, or just honestly being able to run really however it wants to. We saw Taunt Nidoqueen from the Gators. Like, Nidoking can just be run in so many different ways, and it does not surprise me to see it as the top UU Mon and the third place Mon overall in this season so far. So next up, we have kind of sort of power rankings. I guess I'll just explain these before it actually happens. I apologize for the lack of graphics as a whole, and that'll probably get fixed later on. But essentially what I'm going to do is I have split the teams into 4 quadrants. The official rankings will be on the CSL spreadsheet, but these are the rankings as a whole. A lot of these are indicative of score. I mean, a couple of them aren't, but we're seeing a lot of the teams that are lower, a bit more in CSLL range, being in the blue conference. I guess the most notable person in the blue conference is Easy Bake Oven, who I think is the most likely of the 4 to be able to rise up sometime soon, due to their just they're not going down. Their direction is only going up after facing a definitely rough array of opponents in the past few weeks. In the bronze division, we have the NJ Flabebe, the Florida Feraligatrs, the Houston Haunters, and the Zion Zards. The Houston Haunters, who are 3-3, the Zion Zards, who are 1-5, and then the NJ Flabebe and the Florida Feraligatrs are both 2-4. They both, all these teams are definitely capable of making playoffs, but I think it's going to take a lot of work, and I think it's a lot more likely for the NJ Flabebe and the Florida Feraligatrs just due to how the divisions are right now. But in the end, they all have around the same skill level, but I don't see them being as I don't see them being on the same level as some of the other teams that are in the silver and gold divisions. So moving on to those, we have the BC Bastiodons, Detroit Pyroar, Syracuse Sylveons, and Calgary Hydro Cannons being in the silver division. These are all teams that probably will make playoffs. I mean, if my gold division, say all 4 of them go to playoffs, like still half of them are going to go to playoffs, and all these players have either 4-2 or 3-3 records, and they've definitely been able to prove their worth in the league thus far. And yeah, I mean, the Syracuse Sylveons and the Detroit Pyro are fighting for that wild card spot, and Obda has really so far got a really good head start on it, and the BC Bastiodons are definitely not out for the count. But in terms of just play level, they're all of these teams are on, with the exception of the BC Bastiodons, who I guess are on a loss streak, but we're definitely seeing them playing very well as the weeks go on. Despite that, all these teams are rising in terms of skill level and in terms of prep level. It's just very easy to see that, which is definitely why I put them in the silver conference, or the silver division, whatever you want to call it. The gold division has Realies, the San Diego Wild Chargers, Krakenation, the Boston Bisharps, Alpha Horrors, the Magcargo Tel Aviv, and Kleizorka, the Saugatuck Sandslahes. All 4 of these teams are the top of their divisions, and also just all these matches, a lot of matches I've seen, the Realies versus the Detroit Pyroar, or the Bisharps versus Alpha Juarez, or even the Sylveons versus the Wild Chargers. They're all matches that are definitely matches that are to be seen in playoffs, or even higher than that, even just a higher skill level than that. These are all teams that, no matter what their opponent is, they've prepped to the fullest of their extent. They make great predictions. They perform well under pressure, and all in all, it shows in their record. And I know I said in some of the power rankings that the power rankings aren't indicative of the record, but sometimes it just shows in terms of the record that the player's level, the player's level is shown, and it's indicative of the record. But I definitely don't think any of these 4 teams are 100% deadlocked here to stay. Every single person has someone riding up on them in their conference, and even if I certainly know that most of these 4 teams are pretty confident that they're at the top of their division, but with 7 more weeks left to go, you never know. And none of these teams have a team with more than 1 or 2 games behind them, and it can just take 1 loss from them and 1 win from their opposing team to make the playoff race so much closer. So currently, those are the teams that have been doing well, but this is definitely still subject to change as far as I'm concerned. So moving on to the standings, actually, for the CSL Season 4. For the CSL Season 4, we see the Yellow Division with the Boston Bisharps as the leader on a 1-win streak, with a 12 differential, being the 3rd technically in terms of statistics, 2nd in terms of just conference, in terms of just making it based on conference. They are significantly ahead compared to Sandman and Nefertum, being the coaches of the Mamoswines and the Flabebe, respectively. But Abda definitely, if Abda can pull through, and Akeem, like if Abda ends up beating Akeem in one of the upcoming weeks, then this playoff race is going to seem a lot closer than it does right now. And actually, the Yellow Division playoff standing is one of the 2 that I think are going to be the toughest if my predictions end up being right by the end of the season. In the Crystal Division, you see a little less of a competition, but still, it's definitely there, especially for the wild card spot. It kind of looks like Alpha Juarez has it a bit locked up, but really, in the end, Easy Bake, Blazin', and Dubstep are all neck and neck, and are also still neck and neck with Sandman and Nefertum, and it takes Abda only 1 loss to be right back where he started again in this playoff race with these 5 other players. But all 6 of these players are very middle ground players. I'd say their standing is in the middle of the league, which is definitely being shown. Or most of these players are in the middle of the league, which is definitely being shown by the record, and a lot of it being very equal, like how Dub beat Sandman, but Sandman beat Abda, and Abda just beat Dub. So they're all beating each other. It's not like there's one out of the 6 who aren't the Magcargo Tel Aviv and the Boston Bisharps. Out of the 6 in the Yellow and Crystal divisions, none of them have a superior reign over each other. So the playoff race is literally anyone's game there. In the Emerald and Platinum division, we see a bit more of a clear standing. I think the one thing to look out for is that the Detroit Pyroar can very easily rise above the San Diego Wild Chargers, especially if Zwoops wins this week and Realies loses. Like, you never know, and that will really put Realies in a spot that Zwoops has been in this entire season so far, which is a playoff competition with Dan to just in the end just what's the word? Just it's going to be a huge playoff competition between Entertainment, Realies, and Zwoops, and even Classy Zork if he starts losing a couple. Classy has a 19 differential and a 6-0 record, but once again, it can only take one loss against Dan, and then another loss on top of that to be neck and neck with him again. Anyway, so moving on to the Week 7 matchups and predictions, we first have the San Diego Wild Chargers versus the, I forgot to do the predictions for the other ones. Sorry about that. I apologize. Yeah, sorry, Dan. Anyway, starting with the San Diego Wild Chargers taking on the Calgary Hydro Cannons. Both of these teams, Calgary Hydro Cannons just had a huge win, and the San Diego Wild Chargers just had a huge loss. And both these players have never faced each other before, and I definitely do not think Abda is out for the count on this one. Especially because Realies has just lost momentum this past week, and Abda's gained so much. I think that Abda is really going to start to buckle and prep really hard for this match. Nonetheless, I think this will be a really close match, and it's really anyone's game, but I don't know, my gut tells me to go for the Calgary Hydro Cannon, so that's what I'm actually going to go for, taking down Realies and the San Diego Wild Chargers. I think that even though Staraptor is definitely a huge wall breaker, I think that the Calgary Hydro Cannons have sufficient enough ways to deal with it, and then have also additional things on top of that that put so much offensive pressure on the San Diego Wild Chargers teams. But yeah, I just had to take a risk and go for the Calgary Hydro Cannons on that one. For the other one, for the second match, we have the Detroit Pyroar taking on the Memphis Mamoswines. I have to say the Detroit Pyroar win this one. In their past 2 matches, I think the Pyroar have come away with 4-0 and 5-0 victories. Honestly, just skill-wise, the Pyroar have been on a rise from being 2-2 to now being 4-2, and haven't had any devastating losses yet. Well, Anthony has just ended his mini streak of 2 with his first loss since week 3. So I think in terms of momentum and skill as a player that the Detroit Pyroar will take this one. Next up, we have the Houston Haunters versus the Magcargo Tel Aviv. I definitely do not think, even though the Crystal Division is looking like the most obvious division for playoffs, I still think that Alpha has to really give it his all, because 4-3 is not a record you want to be in, especially when you're still fighting Akeem for that, when you're still fighting the Boston Bisharps for that wild card bye spot, that wild card the playoff semifinal spot, the automatic advancement there. I definitely don't think Alpha's going to let his guard down, and Damon and the Haunters have not been showing huge promise against teams like Classy Zork, where he got 6-0'd, or teams like the Detroit Pyroar, where he, even though the score was a 2-0, he never had momentum from the start. Maybe we'll see something new. I know he's very creative in team building, but I think the Magcargo Tel Aviv will take this one. Next up, we have the Florida Feraligatrs taking on the Zion Zards. I think that the Zion Zards are going to win this one, just because of the fact that Cherrymander has been having, even though you see the 1-5, like, the 2 best teams in the league are the Boston Bisharps and the Saugatuck Sandslahes. They beat the Boston Bisharps, and they had only a 1-0 loss versus the Saugatuck Sandslahes. And if the circumstances were right, it could have been a victory against them. against the Sandslahes, if the circumstances were right, but they unfortunately weren't. But I definitely see Charmander holding his own versus Blazin. He's back in that range of facing teams that are having a lower record just like him, and this is going to be an opportunity for him to really push himself out of that CSLL spot where he might move down. I think this is a great opportunity for him to push himself a bit higher on the standings. Even if it doesn't mean going to playoffs, like, it's still a good chance to kind of show yourself in the league, and I think that Charmander will definitely have the push and the drive to defeat the Feraligatrs. So I'm gonna vote. I'm going to predict the Zion Zards to win this one. Next up, we have a very cool matchup. This is actually possibly, in terms of skill level, this is probably my most excited I am for a match in week 7, being the BC Bastiodons versus the NJ Flabebe, both of which have essentially had 4 loss streaks. I know the Bastiodons are 3-3, but one of those was a forfeit. Both the teams were 2-0 since week 2 and have been sliding in the past 4 weeks, and this is going to be really an opportunity for either the or for both of them to really put themselves back in a good wild card spot. And I think if, like you'll see below, if Dan loses and the Bastiodons win, that playoff race is so much closer than it originally was. So I think that it's gonna be a close match, but I have to give it to the NJ Flabebe and Nefertum, who have just been this was the one match. Actually, I'm gonna give it to the Bastiodons. Yeah, am I gonna give it to the Bastiodons? Yeah, I'm gonna give it to the Bastiodons, actually. Sorry, Neff. I think the Bastiodons were able to hold their own for most of the match against the Detroit Pyroar, and the NJ Flabebe really didn't have enough momentum throughout the entire match against Blazin. So I think with that alone, the Bastiodons just have more drive and determination to really reclaim their wild card spot that they could have for the playoffs, because they are definitely not out. I think this is going to be a good opportunity for the BC Bastiodons. I think he's going to have better prep, and I also think that we'll just see him. We'll see him back on a roll. Next up, we have the Boston Bisharps versus the Syracuse Sylveons. And I'm sorry, Akeem, you're my bro, but I have to give this to Dan for a couple of reasons. Dan has been on a 4-game win streak, and he is definitely not slowing down unless you just put tremendous pressure on him during the match, which you are very capable of doing. However, the Sylveons, and I will not say what they are, have certain Pokemon that can do certain things that obliterate your team. So unfortunately, I feel like this is the safer route, and I'm going to predict the Syracuse Sylveons. You're definitely capable of taking Dan down. You've done it before, but unfortunately, Akeem, I'm talking to you. I'm voting. Why do I keep saying vote? I'm predicting the Syracuse Sylveons to take this one, unfortunately. But it definitely will not affect. I feel like Dan's win or loss affects him much, much more than Akeem's win or loss. So I also think that Dan will just have a lot more determination and a lot better team prep to win this one. Next up, we have the Saugatuck Sandslahes versus the Texas Tauros. I have to give this one to Classy. I think that there have been definitely opportunities in the season where Classy's gotten the opportunity to get slowed down by other players, but I don't think Easy Bake Govin's going to be the one to take him down. Easy Bake has gotten his 2 wins versus kind of subpar teams as far as I'm concerned. They haven't really been able to hold their own incredibly well against players like Krakenation or Entertainment. But I think that he'll learn from these experiences, and maybe it'll be a closer match than the week 1 match he had versus Akeem was. But I think that Classy is not letting his guard down. He does not want to be he wants to keep a good position for himself where he stays in this undefeated or significantly top number 1 spot until he knows he's safe to go to playoffs, or he's safe to be in the semifinals bye spot that he's been able to hold throughout the entire season. Next up, we have, lastly actually, we have the Southeast Swablu versus the Washington Weaviles. And both of these teams are the number 16 and number 15 spots. And both of these teams' wins mean a lot. The Southeast Swablu, if they win, they have a lot stronger of a chance to not be in CSL range, which will put them in a good spot for their match versus Cherry a lot further down the road, which will be the fight for the CSLL spot. And the Washington Weaviles still definitely have a good shot at playoffs. And they are unfortunately also in CSL range due to the how close the upper conference is. But I think a win for the Weaviles will definitely take them out of it, and so will a win for the Swablu. So this match is actually a very important match for both teams. I have to give it to the Southeast Swablu though. Funny enough, I think that I think that the Swablu, we've seen the Weaviles been on a roller coaster throughout this season, having 2 rough losses and then 2 really big wins and then 2 more rough losses. So I don't know if a pattern will continue and the Weaviles will have another 2 strong wins, but from what I've seen these past 2 weeks, the Weaviles haven't been able to pull anything off great, whereas I've seen the Swablu be able to hold their own to some extent against players like Alpha Horus and players like Damon, who though aren't the number 1 and number 2 though they aren't like the number 1 and number 2 in the season. Swablu has been able to show off her cool team building skills and just overall, especially offensive power of her team. So that's going to do it for the CSL Week 6 recaps. Comment below if you disagree with anything I said. Also, my commentary is probably a bit off, but if there's any suggestions you'd like to make, I'd love to hear it. I'll probably be continuing to do this at some point, but I'd love to hear how I sound on terms of without anybody around note. I'd love to hear how I sound without any other people around. So I'd love suggestions. So if you can comment those below. Also, if you have any predictions and you want to put them in the comments, that's really cool. So subscribe for more CSL content, and I'll see y'all later. Sorry, I'm going to start remembering to name my predictions at the beginning of each. Sorry, Dan.